Oh, it's a flurry. Hey guys, Conrad Craft here. So it's snowing in Texas. I live just north of Houston, and this just doesn't happen. So I know you guys from up north are like, oh, that's not really snow, that's just barely anything. But yeah, for here it's a lot. So anyway, we're gonna start today on the snowboard build. I'm super excited that y'all are here with me. Let's get to it.
Alright, so the materials that I'm using for this project are poplar and black walnut. Poplar is a pretty strong wood, but it's not a super expensive wood, so I'm really happy about that. It only took a couple of boards of poplar, and I had a piece of walnut laying around that I was able to rip down into small staves and flip sideways so that the grain was vertical and glue up. When you do it this way, the vertical grain actually makes the integrity of the board a lot stronger. It allows it to flex and still maintain its integrity without snapping or breaking. After gluing all that up, I glued up a second board. This board was going to be for my brother, and I wanted to do a little bit of a different design on it. So I had one board that had 3 stripes and one board with 2 stripes. You guys tell me which one you thought you liked the best in the comments. Here you can see I'm just unclamping the second board. This is the board with 3 stripes. I had some excess material hanging off the end there, and I'm going to trim that with my hand saw after I get it out of the clamps.
Snowboard blank. Yes.
You can see my youngest running around behind me. She loves coming out in the shop whenever I'm out there, and she'll pick up something and walk away with it, and I won't know where it went for a couple of days. So it's fun for her, but sometimes a pain in the neck for me. But I love her, and I love that she's out there with me anyway. Now, after unclamping the board, I planed down the glue lines and everything, and just make sure it's all true and straight. And after doing that to both boards, I'm ready to go ahead and start working on the base. Now, to get the base ready, I'm going to need to create a template. And so I made one out of some wall panel I had hanging around, and I just copied the shape of a snowboard I already had. I'm also going to need to make the press, and I'm doing that with 2x4s. I'm going to cut the camber shape on the 2x4s, and this is kind of a labor-intensive way to do it and a really heavy-duty way to do it. And after doing it this way, I don't really recommend using this method, but it worked for what I needed to do. It's definitely strong. It's just not fast. You have a lot of belt sanding to do to get all the seam lines between these 2x4s flush and flat and straight, because the base is going to be what you're riding on. So if that's not flat and straight and even, you're going to have a different ride. So I'm going to look into doing this a different way next time I do it. But this is how I did it, so hopefully you get something out of it. You can see there's, curves and ridges and stuff. I'm going to have to belt sand and plane all of that out. And I ended up doing that. Angle grinder with a nice sanding disc worked pretty well as well. So I did the same thing to the top piece. These are the staves for the top piece of the press. Just glued that up. This is all Titebond 2 wood glue. After I pull that out of the clamps, that all has to get a lot of work belt sanding and planing to make smooth. While I was doing that, I got a box in the mail. This is some parts that I had ordered from a ski supply company. It's my top sheet and base sheet. Those are both clear plastic sheets. And my edging material, metal edging material, and my sidewall material. This is a plastic sidewall material that they make for skis and snowboards. The metal edging is fairly easy to bend, but it would be way easier if I had one of the bending tools to make this happen. But I bent it by hand over a piece of metal, and after cutting the profile using my template on the base, I was able to start gluing the metal edging material to the base. Now, the glue that I used was a simple thick CA glue, and you just go in between the flanges on the base edging material, and you just put a dot. I put it every 3rd flange opening and just clamped it all down with clothespins, as you can see. You need 2 pieces, so you have to seam them together at the very tips. After doing that, I let that sit up for a few hours while I was working on something else. So once your rim and base are completely glued together, you can draw the grand profile of that base onto your board core, and that'll let you know exactly where your board is going to get cut and where everything's going to be centered and such. This is something that you're going to need to do so that you can cut for your sidewall so that your sidewall overlaps the metal rim. So the reason you want this excess or overlap of the sidewall material over the metal trim or metal edging is because you want that excess to be able to be trimmed off after you pull this out of the press. When it's in the press, it shifts a little bit, so you just want to make up for that shifting that's going on.
This board will get this sidewall material, and then that board is going to get walnut sidewalls.
So the plastic sidewall material is pretty easy to put on. You can see I just used some masking tape and I used some epoxy, two-part epoxy, to stick that on. The tape holds it nice and tight. There's plenty of squeeze out. Epoxy, you don't want to squeeze out a ton anyway, but that worked well. For this, I'm going to use Type Bond. You can see the grand perimeter I drew, and you can also see the secondary line inside of that I drew. Grand perimeter line, secondary line. The secondary line is what I cut to with the scroll saw, and then I glue on my extra walnut piece. This is the same walnut that I use on my two stripes in the middle of the board. Now, the nice thing about that template I made is that I actually marked out where my bindings were going to go on the template. So as soon as you're able to mark the perimeter on your core, you can mark the binding spots as well with an awl. I just punched through with an awl and marked it on my board. So that's permanently there. I'll never have to wonder where to put that. After clamping the sidewalls up, letting them dry, everything looked good. So it was time to start planing down the glue lines there at the sidewall area, and then planing the final shaping to the thicknesses of these cores. Now, I actually wasn't sure how thin I needed to go and where I needed to start going, so this was all trial and error for me. And at this point, I'm also just trying to decide, because I don't have much time, which board do I need to work most on. I had literally one day before I was going on vacation in Colorado, and I needed this board core to be as much worked as possible. So I ended up going with the double striper and using my cheap power plane that I bought from Harbor Freight. This is just a Drill Master power plane, one of their $30 power planes. And it worked great. And I planed down the ends to about 1/16 of an inch at the very tip. When using a power plane or anything like a belt sander on a long piece of wood like this where you're doing the whole surface, I found using masking tape to hold it down worked really well, so it doesn't get in your way. So you can see I tapered from about 1/16 of an inch up to about 1/2 an inch, and I thought that was going to be great for helping it bend into the shape necessary to fit in the form and just be super solid. Now, what I didn't realize when I was doing this is that a super flexible board in general is not really what you want. You know, having the very tip able to bend without snapping so that it bends into the form and can be laminated up well, yeah, that's what you want. But you don't really have to go as thin as I did. I went to 1/16 of an inch. I don't think in the future I would go any less than 1/8 of an inch. I mean, maybe I would leave it at 3/16 of an inch at the very tip for a solid wood core like this. But you don't have to go that thin. You want a stiff board. The stiffer the board is, it's actually makes it easier to carve and turn. So here I'm pre-drilling for the flanges on my inserts for the bindings. These inserts are just some 1/4 inch T-nuts, and so I'm drilling and checking to make sure the flange sits flush at the surface. And I'm happy with that, so I'll drill the rest of the flange holes. These are just T-nuts that I bought at my local hardware store. After these flange holes are drilled, you're going to want to pilot the through hole for the actual insert threaded area. And with that, I did that with a drill bit slightly over 1/4 of an inch thick. And now it's just time to epoxy the inserts in. I put them in with plenty of epoxy and then sand them flush to the surface afterwards. After sanding the rest of the board kind of to a finished state, it's time to plug these holes. If you leave these holes open whenever you go to laminate up the board, you're going to get epoxy and stuff seep into them and you won't be able to get it out. It'll be in the threads and you won't be able to use your bindings. So for this, I'm just using little masking tape squares that I cut and laying them over. This is the underside of the board. These are big squares for that. And I don't want them to completely cover my inserts. I want the edges of my inserts to contact some epoxy. And then I put small pieces just over the holes on the top of the board. So it's finally come to it. The time is up. It's time for me to go on vacation. So I'll have to finish it when I get there. Hey guys, I'm here in sunny Dillon, Colorado area. Snowed last night, but I'm looking forward to laminating up that board today, getting it set up, ready to go tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Alright guys, it is now time to laminate this board up. All the pieces are ready. I'm a little bit nervous, but we'll see what happens, right? I've got to put the base on first, and then I've got to put the fiberglass on, and then I've got to put the core on, and then I'll have the top sheet. So each of those layers gets a coat of the epoxy clear coat that I'm using to basically act as my adhesive for this. And it has to be brushed on or scraped on with a spatula very smoothly, and all the bubbles, air bubbles, removed for this to work and not delaminate. So we'll see what happens. Wish me luck. Here I go. So right now I'm just getting all my surfaces ready, putting plastic over my form so that I don't get the board completely permanently adhered to my form. I got a piece of styrofoam. I'm just going to lay up everything in order, starting with the base. Mix up my super glaze clear coat epoxy, and once it's mixed and stirred thoroughly, I'm just going to start layering it on my base and rim metal. You want to fill that rim metal with epoxy really good. So now I'm layering on my fiberglass. I use 2 sheets of this, and the putty knife I'm using is just like a Bondo putty knife. These pieces of fiberglass seamed together in the middle really well. I was really pleased with that. This is all stuff I got at Home Depot, the epoxy and the fiberglass. So now goes the core after another layer of epoxy, and after pushing it down, making sure it's seated properly between the 2 side walls, I'm going to layer on more epoxy. And I really should have put a whole lot more on, because whenever you put the clear top sheet on, if you don't want any bubbles, you need plenty of epoxy. But didn't quite have enough, so I ended up with a few bubbles underneath the top coat, which if you're doing a flat or a matte top coat, it doesn't matter because you won't see it, but with a clear top coat, you'll totally see it. Anyway, after I got the top coat all pressed on and all the bubbles pushed out as good as I could, everything wiped clean of epoxy, and gloves changed out on my hands so that I didn't have any residue of epoxy on my hands. Everything cleared out of the way off of my press, put new gloves on, and I was ready to set that thing up on the press and start pressing it together. So the bottom of the press is just the 2x4 slab curved to the shape of the camber I want. The top of the press actually starts with the foam, and then we get the cap 2x4 set up. One thing that I'm going to do different in the future when I do a press like this is I'm going to, instead of clamping just the top piece down to the bottom piece, I'm going to use perpendicular 2x4s going between the clamps. That way it holds it perfectly straight and there's no chance for it to curve and create pockets for air bubbles. Okay guys, the board has been in the press for over 12 hours.
This particular kind of epoxy likes to cure for at least 24 before it's completely hard. But I'm going to go ahead and pull it out and give you guys a peek at what this looks like, because it's tough. It's tough enough. It's hard enough that it's not going to lose its shape. So. So here it is. After several hours of work, the board is laminated up finally, and all I have to do is trim it to shape, which the shape will follow the metal edging on the base, which is the bottom layer here. I'll then sand the base because there's going to be glue on the base and pieces of the material still stuck to it, but you can see the overall shape of the board and how it will be cut out. So I'm really excited about how this is looking, and I can't wait to run it tomorrow on the slopes. So see you in a little bit.
Alright guys, that's it for the first part of the two-part How to Build a Snowboard series. In the second part I'm going to finish the board and actually get it up on the slopes, so stay tuned for that. If you like these kind of videos, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Alright, thanks. I'll see you next time.